Hey guys, in today's video I decided to show you how to cut your trailing arm into two perfectly symmetrical halves. Haha, of course I'm joking, the two halves can never be symmetrical. Okay, seriously. So there wasn't enough time in my last video to do the rear suspension, so I showed you only the front suspension, and now I'm gonna show you how I dealt with the rear one. So as you can see, this arm has been cleaned and painted, and Stephanie did that, and it would make a little bit more sense to do what I'm doing right now before the paint, but I was busy with other things, so I couldn't do it, and now I'm trying to protect the paint while I'm working. But anyways, so what I'm doing here is I'm cutting the color, should I call it, of the bushing, so I can take it out. And I've seen people taking out the bushings in generally two different ways. One of them is drilling holes through the rubber with a big drill bit, and this to me sounds like a crazy idea because you might damage the trailing arm, and these are not cheap parts, you know. And the other way of doing it is with torch. They heat the trailing arm with torch until the rubber starts smoking and burning, and then they pull it out, which again I don't think it's a good idea. So now I'm gonna show you my way of doing it. So as usual, I built myself a tool, and it's a very simple tool. It's a long bolt with a washer on one side, which washer is a little bit smaller than the bushing, so it can go through the opening of the trailing arm. On the other side I have a piece of steel tubing which is bigger than the bushing, so the bushing can be pushed inside this tube. And then I have another washer and a nut. And then when I start tightening the bolt and the nut, I simply push the bushing out with the washer, which is on the bolt side. And that's it, nice and simple. You don't need to drill holes dangerously close to the trailing arm, or you don't need to burn the shop down so you can pull it out. It's so simple. And guess what? This same tool I used to install the bushing later, so I think it's useful tool. And this is how I'm installing the new one. This is the old one, of course, goes to the garbage. But first of all, I need to clean the bore of the trailing arm. And for this I'm using this very small wire wheel, which by chance it happened to be the exact size of the opening. And of course I put my arm in the perfect spot. Okay, you can see better here now. And because I can't reach all the way in from one side, I had to turn it around and do it from the other side of the hole too. So that cleaned it perfectly, and now I can start installing the bushing by putting grease first all over the place in the opening on the bushing, so it can slide without any problems. I hate having grease on my hands, even through the gloves it feels ugh. So again, there is a washer behind the bushing which is gonna push it inside the opening. Now I'm still not using the piece of tubing, but later on I will have to put it on so I can push the bushing a little bit out from this side. And then I kept tightening the bolt. Now the position of the pipe is very important, so it's not on the way of the bushing, otherwise the bushing might get cut from the edge of the pipe. And here it's a little bit trial and error, hopefully no error. Like you tighten, you open, you check to see how far you pushed out, then you tighten again until the bushing is spread even on both sides. If you push it too far out, it's not a problem, you can push it back with the same, using the same tool on the other side. But I think I did a good job here, so I just wiped the grease and I could move to the second bushing. And this is what it should look like. I also changed all the rubber plugs. And then I could start assembling. Now this is very important, the brackets here are different for the inner side and the outer side, and also they vary through the models and through the ears. Now they have some notches cut top of the two sides for the TR250, that's for shaft, and for the early ears of the TR6 the outer bracket has two notches and the inner bracket has one notch. And for the late TR6s the outer bracket has only one notch, and for the inner bracket there are three notches. So this is very important to follow, otherwise your alignment is not gonna be right. So I just checked some pictures I took before disassembling it, because I don't remember that by heart. I also checked for the number of the shims that I need to put back, and I started assembling. Now this is important also. You have to put the two bolts inside the bracket before you put the bracket on the trailing arm. Otherwise you're not gonna be able to put them on later. Again, you have to be very careful with the number of the shims. You have to take a note of how many you have there before disassembling, and then put them back when you assemble the suspension, so your alignment is correct. Next comes the spring, and for the spring I use the exact same spring compressor that I use for the front, the exact same way, with the big BMW radiator fan wrench underneath and the big washer on the top. For the back, the spring compressor needs to be a little bit shorter than the front, and that's why I'm using a whole bunch of big nuts as spacers here. And again, I tighten the nuts until it goes high enough so I can assemble the shock absorber. Again, there's one piece of rubber mount on the top, and then another one under the trailing arm, and a nut. And once the shock absorber is fastened, you can remove the spring compressor. Generally, the suspension on the TR6 is much easier to work on than on the Spitfire, because I can use this internal spring compressor, which is much easier to use than the other external spring compressor that I made for my Spitfire. Before you install the axle, it's a good idea to fasten the cable for the e-brake, because you can reach the nut underneath with a socket, which I think it's 3/8. This cable I replaced later with a new one, but I didn't have it here, so I just installed the old one for video editing purposes. A little bit of grease on the slip joint, and then I put it in. As Chef Tash mentioned in his video, this slip joint can be joined in only one way, because one of the splines is a little bit bigger than the others. And then I put the back plate for the brakes and pushed the hub into the 6 rods that are sticking out of the trailing arm. I never disassembled the brakes, so it was easy now to put them back. Remove the tape that Stephanie put there, so she doesn't paint the brake pads. And then I started installing the 6 studs that hold the hub to the trailing arm. And again, as Chef Tash mentioned in his video, these need to be fastened very lightly if you don't want to ruin your trailing arm. Then I attached the brake cable to the lever that moves the slave cylinder for the brakes back and forth. The drum and the tire. And with that, the one side of the suspension was complete, but the other one is just like this one, if you believe it. So thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you in my next video, which is gonna be probably the beginning of the rebuilding of the Spitfire.